Hey guys, Omaha here. Today I'm doing the second level spell tier list. If you didn't watch the first video, I'm going to go over the spell tiers really quick. S is something that's either overpowered or is amazing in pretty much every situation in the game. A is spells that are always really good. They're never a bad option to cast. Maybe not as good as S tier, but they're always good. B, decent spells, good overall. They're outshined by A and S, obviously, and they're not the best in every situation, but generally it's a good idea to cast. C are very mid basic spells where there's almost always a better option, but they're not inherently bad spells. D is where I'd start to consider spells bad. There's always a better option, and unless it's something extremely niche, I generally avoid these spells. And then down here, I have the trash and RP tier. So trash is something I will never cast. I think it's a completely useless spell. Not many spells really go in that category. And then there's RP. So if you watched my first video, I put speak with animals there. It's kind of where I put spells where I just don't really know where to categorize them because they're not necessarily good or bad. And speak with animals, it's kind of there for the role play part of it. It's not, in my opinion, at least good or bad. So that's kind of where I put it. And yeah, let's start the video off. So we're going to start off with aid. Aid will boost your allies with an increased 5 maximum hit points, and that'll go up by 5 hit points for every spell slot above the second. So you cast this around yourself and it does an AoE around 30 feet, and these last until long rest. So this is a really good spell to cast right after you do a long rest until your next long rest, and it gives you just a lot more HP to deal with. So at max level, you're going to get like 30 extra hit points. So that's a really good effect. It's never a bad option to cast, and I think it's worth a spell slot to cast, so I'll put it in the A tier. Next we have Arcane Lock. Yeah, I don't really like this spell, to be honest. It's a very, very, very niche spell in my opinion. So you close a door or container with a magical lock, it can no longer be lockpicked or opened with knock. So it's a range of melee, which that brings it down in my opinion. So the only reason I could see wanting to use this is if you have a big group of enemies and you want to divide the enemy force into two by getting half of them through a doorway and then locking the door. So you can fight half and then fight the other half later, which would certainly be a good thing to do. I mean, it would be a very strong use case. The problem is to set that up, it's extremely difficult. And since it's a range of melee, you basically have to be standing near the door to do that. And then there's not a lot of situations where you can do that. So it's extremely, extremely niche in my opinion. So it's either going to go in the D or the trash tier. I'll put it in D because if you can pull it off, it's very good. Other than that, probably trash. I don't see any other uses for it really. And then after that, we have Bark Skin. So Bark Skin, honestly, I don't like either. So you basically increase a creature's armor class up to 16, and it's a concentration spell. It'll last until long rest or until you break your concentration. But an armor class of 16 really isn't very high, and I really don't think it's worth the spell slot to use this spell, especially being a concentration spell. So this is the one I would probably put in trash tier. If it didn't require a concentration slot, I could see it maybe going in D tier. Max C, but probably not even that. Probably D tier. Yeah, your concentration slot's just too valuable to waste on only an armor class of 16. All right, next we have blindness. So this is a really good spell. You'll hit a target and they'll roll a constitution saving throw, and if they fail, they'll be blinded for 10 turns. So when you upcast, you can affect an additional target per spell slot level. So at level 6, you can affect 6 targets. That's basically fight deciding. So when they're blinded, attack rolls against them will have advantage. You'll roll 2 dice, use the higher value, makes it way easier to hit them. Their attacks will all have disadvantage. So they'll roll 2 dice, use the lower value. It makes it way harder for them to hit you. And it'll also make it so their ranged attacks and spells they'll only have a range of 10 feet or 3 meters. So that's really good. You basically shut that down. Now, the really good thing about this spell is once they fail that constitution saving throw, they're basically locked into 10 turns of blindness. There's like no getting out of that. They don't get to roll saving throws to get out of it. And this is concentration free. So yeah, very powerful. Also a necromancy spell. So you can use the Staff of Cherished Necromancy to get free casts, which is pretty busted, but I'm not going to rate it higher solely because of that. It does help it a little bit, but either way, this is an A tier spell with or without the staff. It's really, really powerful. You can use it way into the late game. It's really good. And then after that, we have Blur. So Blur will make it so attackers have disadvantage on attack rolls against you. It doesn't affect creatures that don't rely on sight or they can see through illusions. Yeah, concentration spell. So that's the only thing bringing it down. You can only use it on yourself. It's a good spell. It's a good effect. Concentration, like I said, does bring it down a little bit because the concentration slots in this game are so competitive. It's so valuable, but it is definitely worth a cast. It just makes you very tanky. So that's something I'd probably put in the very high end of B tier. It'll probably stay at the high end of B tier. Up next, we have Branding Smite. So just like the other Smite spells, I generally say they're pretty good. And this one marks them with a light, preventing them from turning invisible. So that can be pretty fight deciding against people like the Hag, creatures like the Hag, whatever you want to call her. Yeah, that'll shut her down pretty quick. And then this can also be used with range weaponry, which is really good. So this will cost an action, bonus action, and level 2 spell slot. You use your normal weapon damage, and it adds 2 dice 6 radiant damage. So that's good damage, especially for a level 2 spell, and it's radiant damage. That's good. And then you can also actually combine this with Divine Smite, which is very powerful. So you can use Radiating Orb and just get like 6 stacks of that or something like that. A ton of stacks. just from using this with that. Upcasting does an additional 1d6 radiant damage per level, so the upcasting isn't like amazing or anything, but yeah, it's a good spell. Preventing creature from turning invisible is kind of the main appeal of this. It can be kind of fight deciding. I think actually, if you miss the attack, I could be wrong on this, but I think it refunds your bonus action in level 2 spell slot. It doesn't say that in here, but I thought that's how it worked. I don't know, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's how it works. Good spell. I'm debating whether I want to put it at the low end of A or high end of B. I think high end of B is a good spot. I'll put it there. Next, we have Calm Emotions. Humanoids cannot be charmed, frightened, or become enraged. So you cast this within a range of 18 meters or 60 feet, and then it has an AoE of 6 meters or 20 feet, and it's a concentration spell. So yeah, very valuable slot, and the spell is not good. Gives the calmed effect for 10 turns, can't be charmed or frightened. The one good thing about this, I would say, is when you use against targets who already have one of those effects, you can end it immediately, but charmed is really not a big deal. I think it sucks. If you've watched my other videos, you already know that. Frightened, that can suck to have, but heroism is a way better way of getting rid of that. And then the enraged effect's extremely niche. I don't know, you wouldn't want to be ending the enraged effect on your allies, I wouldn't think, but yeah, against enemies, that's like so niche. Spell sucks. It's a concentration slot. Ending the effects early, maybe, but it's only on humanoids. Yeah. I'm just going to put it in the trash tier. It's something I would never use. You can use heroism to get rid of frightened. The charmed effect just sucks. I mean, it's not that big. Anyways, Cloud of Daggers. Now this is something I can get behind. All right. So you conjure a cloud of spinning daggers that attack anyone inside. Cool. 4d4 slashing damage, which is good damage. It's got a range of 60 feet, 18 meters. So it creates this area. It's a concentration spell, but it's fine because this thing's busted. Basically, you cast this down. It immediately does 4d4 slashing damage with no saving throw to resist. It's guaranteed damage. And this does damage every turn at the start of the enemy's turn. So you're guaranteed, unless your concentration breaks before their turn starts, which is highly unlikely. I mean, it's possible. But unless your concentration breaks, you're getting 2 instances of this damage. So you're getting 8 to 32 slashing damage guaranteed. Yeah, really powerful. And then you upcast and get an extra 2d4 slashing damage for each spell slot above the second. And then you're basically doubling that because you're almost guaranteed 2 instances of this damage. It's super powerful. And there's no saving throw to resist. And it's an AoE, so you can hit multiple enemies with this. It's so powerful. It's so good. I'd say the only thing to knock it down is that it's slashing damage, and some people can be resisted to that. But even then, man, this is just such a good spell. Last 10 turns, it's an S tier. Doubling the damage, basically, of what it already says. All right, our next spell is Crown of Madness. So you instill madness in a humanoid enemy, so it's only on humanoids, making them attack the creature closest to them other than you, even if it's allied. So this doesn't protect your allies from the enemy. So you want to make sure, you just want to be careful about having your allies closer to the enemy than his allies. But if you can manage that, this is a really powerful spell. It's a concentration spell. I mean, it's fine. It's a good use of a concentration slot, in my opinion. The only thing is it lasts only 3 turns, and it's a wisdom saving throw. So it's a short duration, but it's extremely powerful because one thing not stated is when you use this on an enemy, it makes them hostile towards everyone around them, but it also makes them attack him. So you're having everybody waste their turns on trying to kill this guy that you cast Crown of Madness on, and he's wasting his turns attacking basically everyone around him. So yeah, incredibly powerful. If you can get your DC up, it's a little hard to land on the DC sometimes, but if you can get your spell save DC up and you can land this reliably, it's a fight decider almost every time. It's super powerful. And like I said, it's a little bit finicky. You just got to keep your allies kind of away from the guy. But this works on Eldritch Knight Fighter, so if you use that, and you're probably the closest one to the fight, and they don't attack you. So in that case, it's really good. Kind of the same goes with if you're using Oathbreaker Paladin or like a Bard multi-class. Like Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard, you're probably going to be a little farther away from the fight. So you want to be careful in those instances. But yeah, twin casting this with a Sorcerer, you can have 2 enemies running around killing everybody, and then the group trying to kill all those 2 guys. Super powerful if you can reliably land it. Just get your DC a little higher, like I said, which isn't too hard to do. It decides fights. It's really powerful. After that, we have Darkness. So Darkness is basically Fog Cloud. That's just how it is. It's essentially the exact same thing. And if you watched my first video or my level 1 spell video, you know, I put that in S tier. It's extremely broken. Yeah, you can pop in and out of it and basically be invincible. It gives you heavily obscured benefits from gear that benefit from that. Inflicts creatures with blind if they're inside of it. You can combine this with Devil's Sight from the Warlock, or the Warlocks that make you immune to that. So that's extremely powerful. You're basically invincible at that point. But yeah, if you're using a ranged character, you sit in this, you run out, shoot, then run back in, you end your turn, and yeah, you're basically invincible. It's pretty ridiculous. And then you can also use it for theft, kind of crime stuff. I used Fog Cloud throughout all my honor mode run to steal basically everything from every vendor with little difficulty. Super good in and out of combat. It is basically Fog Cloud, and it could be said that this should be lower because Fog Cloud is level 1 spell, and that's an S tier. So this should be lower because it's a level 2 spell, and why would you use this when you can use Fog Cloud? But not everybody gets Fog Cloud. Some people get this and they don't get Fog Cloud. So I think I'll just leave it in the S tier just because of that. Next, we have Dark Vision. So Dark Vision lets you see in the dark up to 12 meters or 40 feet. It's a range of melee, so 5 feet or 1.5 meters. No upcasting. Lasts until a long rest. I wish this was a ritual spell because I think it'd be a lot better. But let's see. I think 6 races. Yeah, all the elves get this by default. Tieflings, dwarves, half-elves, forest gnome, rock gnome, and half-orc. They all get that as a passive off the rip. And so odds are you're already going to have this. So I honestly have never used the spell because I've always played races where you just get it already. And then you can just use light sources as well. So I'm going to put it in C tier. I don't really know how to categorize that one, honestly. It's a good effect. Certainly, you don't want to have disadvantage in the dark and attacking creatures, but I'd say odds are you're already going to have it. Next, we have Detect Thoughts. So this lets you read the minds of creatures. It's a concentration, a ritual spell. So you can cast this during conversation or just cast it and it lasts till long rest or concentration breaks. It's just a cool spell that lets you detect creatures' thoughts, gives you insight on what they're thinking and stuff. So this is one of those spells I would put in RP just because I don't really categorize it as good or bad. It's just kind of fun to use and I actually really like it a lot. It's not trash. It's just RP. So yeah, that's where it's going to go. Just a fun thing to use. And then we have Enhance Ability. So I think this spell is slept on a lot, especially in honor mode. Well, not especially in honor mode. I think it's just slept on in general. It gives you advantage on ability checks with a chosen ability. It's a concentration spell, but that doesn't matter because you can apply this mid-conversation and get advantage on pretty much any die roll that you're going to roll in a conversation. And then there's also variants for it. So you can use the bear one, which will give you advantage on constitution checks, and you get 7 temporary HP. You got the bull strength, which will give you advantage on strength, and then weight limit is doubled. You have the cat's grace, so you get advantage on dexterity checks, and you take half damage from falling, which that honestly kind of sucks. Not really that big of a deal. Eagle's Splendor, which is probably the most useful one, where you get advantage on charisma checks for the dialogue, like I was saying. And these last until long rest, by the way, which is really good. Fox's Cunning, you get advantage on intelligence checks. And then there's Owl's Wisdom, where you get advantage on wisdom checks. So yeah, in combat, I don't really use this, to be honest. Not that it's bad. I never really used it in combat. Never really seen the need to. But outside of combat for ability checks in dialogue, it is absolutely, in my opinion, S tier. The concentration doesn't matter because you're using it for the dialogue check, but using a level 2 spell slot in honor mode to significantly increase your chance of passing a die roll, I think is totally worth it. And I think it's an S tier spell that you can use throughout the entire game. Next, we have Enlarge/Reduce. So you can either use Enlarge, which will give the creature increased size. They'll be larger and they'll weigh more, which is important later. Your weapons will deal an extra 1d4 damage, or theirs rather. It'll have advantage on strength checks and saving throws. So that's generally a good effect, not amazing. Yeah, it'll last 10 turns. So it also has the Reduce effect where you use it probably on a hostile creature, and its weapons will deal 1d4 less damage, minimum of 1. It'll have disadvantage on strength checks and saving throws. That's not as good as the Enlarge, in my opinion. Overall, I think the spell is good, like I said before, and it's not amazing. There is the very niche use, which is something I love. Using this on an owlbear, and you do owlbear off the top ropes. If you've seen my Grimforge video, you know how that works. You can one-shot bosses with this, basically, like thousands of damage. So yeah, Grim, the Forge guy, is one use of that. You can also stack crates and do that as well, which I don't usually do. It takes a lot of patience. But yeah, you can one-shot bosses with that. So that's extremely niche. I don't want to rate it because of that, but it is a fun thing to do. I think this is like a low B tier spell. I think that's a good spot where I'll leave it. And then after that, we have Enthrall. So Enthrall reduces a creature's peripheral vision and makes it look at you. There's no upcasting. I've never used the spell, honestly, not once. Well, I think I probably have used it once. I did a video on every spell, so I had to have used it at least once, but I don't remember it, and I always forget it's in the game. Let's just put it at that. If anybody knows a good use of it, I don't know. I never hear anybody talking about this spell. I just totally forget it's even in the game. I don't know where to put it otherwise. It's got to be down here somewhere, though. If no one talks about it, it's not really something I see people using. Let's go with D tier, just because I don't know how trash it is. I think that's a good spot. Up next, we have Flame Blade. So you conjure a flaming scimitar in your hand that deals 3d6 fire damage. It sheds a bright light in a 3 meter, 10 foot radius, and a dim light in a 6 meter, 20 foot radius. The blade can be unequipped and equipped again, but it has to stay on the spellcaster's person. So it's a bonus action, which is good. That's pretty decent damage for a bonus action. You can only use it on yourself. When you cast it at 4th level or higher, the damage increased by 1d6 fire for every 2 spell slots above the second. So that's 1d6 at level 4 and 1d6 at level 6. So you max out at 5d6 fire damage, unless I'm just terrible at math. So that's pretty decent. And you can actually dual wield this. It can go in your main hand or your offhand, and you can unequip it at any time, but it has to stay on your person. The only thing is it only lasts 10 turns, but it is concentration free. So yeah, it's a decent spell. The only thing is it's only on the druid or the, yeah, I'm not going to say this, tiefling. So when I play druid, I usually play moon druid, and I'm usually in my animal form. So I'm not going to really be using this, and to be quite frank, I don't really use it. I've used it a couple times, and it's good, but I just would rather be in my animal form. That's what I like. So yeah, it's a good spell. And I think the B tier, I already placed it there preemptively. I think right below Blur is a good spot for it for now. And then next we have Flaming Sphere. So you summon a Flaming Sphere that deals 2d6 fire damage to nearby enemies and objects. It also sheds bright light in a 6 meter, 20 foot radius and a dim light for an additional 6 meter, 20 foot radius. So that'd be 12 meters, 40 feet. It lasts 10 turns. And you can move it around. And it's a summon, so it'll aggro enemies, it'll take hits. And then the upcasting is good. The fact that it does an extra 1d6 fire damage for every spell slot above the second, this applies to all of its attacks. And the AoE around it is good upcasting, in my opinion. It's a dex save to have the damage, and it's a concentration spell. Yeah, I think for this spell, it's really good for a 2nd level spell. You will probably put it at the bottom. I think it'll stay around the bottom of the A tier for me. I actually forgot to add that this also leads to Fire Surface wherever you move it around. I think the Fire Surface does 1d4 fire damage like normal Fire Surfaces. But still, I mean, that's a little bit extra damage. So it's still going to stay here at the bottom of A, but just thought I'd add that in. All right, my headset broke mid-recording this video, so that's why I have a new headset on. But yeah, I had to wait a couple days to get this new one as well. So anyways, next we have Gust of Wind. So this summons a strong wind that clears all clouds. That can be kind of useful outside of combat, or I guess in combat as well. Any creatures caught in the gale who fails strength saving throw will be pushed back 5 meters or 17 feet and be thrown off balance. That'll give you advantage on attack rolls against them, and they'll have disadvantage on strength and dexterity ability checks. I don't really care so much for this part of it, because the reason you want to be using this is to knock enemies out of the map for an insta-kill. Similarly to Thunder... Did I say Thunder Wave? What was it? I think it's Thunder Wave, yeah. Similarly to Thunder Wave. So yeah, Thunder Wave is actually technically better in my opinion, and it's a spell slot lower. So even without that, this is situational, and it's not doing any damage. So I think high end of B tier is where I'd want to place that. If you can pull it off and kill enemies instantly, that's fantastic. I mean, it's really good, but it's just situational. So I think high end of B tier is a good spot. Then we have Hate Metal. So this will cause the wearer to either drop their weapon or receive disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. In every case I've used this, they drop their weapon every time unless they have some way of preventing them from being disarmed. So if the target is made out of metal or wearing metal armor, it will always receive disadvantage. And if it's a construct, you can just keep reapplying this as a bonus action every turn for 2d8 fire damage. The bonus action part of it doesn't really work on everybody else because it applies to the weapon instead of the person holding the weapon. So basically you disarm them, and then you're not going to be able to get the extra damage because they're not going to be holding the weapon anymore. But even still, really strong spell, just because disarming somebody basically ends the fight against that person. So this is going to have to go probably at the top of A tier. And then we have Hold Person. So Hold Person, you can basically lock them in place. They can't move, act, or react. And then attack from within 3 meters or 10 feet are always crits. Super strong spell if you can get your spell save DC really, really high. And so, yeah, you can basically end fights with this. Upcasting can affect additional targets per level as well. So if you can get that on like 5 people, that'll just completely end the fight for you. I don't know if I want to put an S tier. It's either going to be the top of A tier or somewhere here in S. I'm pretty picky about what I put in S tier. You kind of have to build around it if you want it to be guaranteed every time. So I think high end of A is good, but if you can land that effect, it's extremely, extremely powerful. Next up, we have Invisibility. So you'll use an action to turn yourself invisible, or a creature, I guess within range of 5 feet of you. It's also a concentration to hold the invisibility. Attacks against it will have a disadvantage. It attacks with advantage. So this is a great way to set up before combat to get a surprise round. And really that's the main reason you'd want to use it. There's a lot of ways to do that though. So I'm thinking I'm gonna put it in the B tier, because it is good. There's certainly nothing wrong with it, but it's not like amazing or anything. And then we have Knock. Knock just unlocks mundane locks. It's instead of pickpocketing. So I'm gonna put it into RP. It's not trash. There's not really a way for me to categorize this as amazing or trash. Like, it's just unlocking stuff. So I think it is cool, and I do like it a lot, but it's RP. And then we have Lesser Restoration, and this lets you cure a creature from diseased, poisoned, paralysis, or blinded, which is good. It's not like amazing or anything. It's kind of situational because it's very like reactive. You're kind of just waiting for the enemy to do that to you, and then you'll like use this. But yeah, it's good at what it does. I think the low end of B tier is a good spot for it though. Next we have Magic Weapon. So you infuse the weapon with arcane energy, the weapon becomes magical, receiving a +1 bonus to attack rolls and damage rolls. In my opinion, that is very minor. That's a very minor effect for the spell slot level that you have to use to cast this. And upcasting at 4th or 5th level will increase the bonus by 2, and at 6th level it'll increase by 3. I just don't think it'll last until long rest too, which that part of it is good. I just don't think it's worth using a level 2 spell slot just for that minor of an effect. So I think the high D tier, which is usually avoid, is something that's where I would put it because I usually avoid that spell. Then we have Melf's Acid Arrow. So you shoot an arrow. It's actually an attack roll. It does 4d4 acid damage immediately and 2d4 acid damage at the end of the target's next turn. And then if you miss, it will deal half this initial damage. So 2d4 damage guaranteed. And they won't take damage at the end of their next turn. But yeah, 4d4 plus 2d4 damage is really good. And then the upcasting deals an additional 2d4 acid damage initially and an additional 1d4 acid damage at the end of their next turn. So the upcasting is really good. Yeah, and you can crit with this as well since it's an attack roll. So yeah, this damage can be critted. So it's a good spell. I think right in, let's put it right in here. I think that's a good, yeah, I'll put it above Blur. It's a good one. And then after that, we have Mirror Image. So you create 3 illusory duplicates of yourself to distract attackers. Each duplicate increases your armor class by 3. So that would be +9 initially. And then every time you evade an attack, one of the duplicates disappears. So you have +9 armor class, then +6 after they miss, then +3 after they miss again, and then it goes away after the 3rd miss. So this is really high survivability in a short amount of time. And for a 2nd level spell slot, it's totally worth it in my opinion. It's a really good spell. So this will go into the A tier. I'm thinking, let's put it right in here. Next up, we have Misty Step. This lets you use a level 2 spell slot and a bonus action to teleport to a range of 18 meters or 60 feet. Super good. Always good, really. Not like fight deciding, like I would put something in the S tier. But certainly it's always good in almost every situation. So I think A tier is a good spot. Probably, I think right here would be a good spot for it. Then we have Moonbeam. So this is going to be kind of similar to Cloud of Daggers. However, it's a smaller AoE. It is radiant damage, which is great. Better damage type in my opinion. And you can actually move this every turn. When it's cast at 3rd level or higher, damage increases by 1d10 radiant for each spell slot above the 2nd. So it's pretty decent scaling. Yeah, the AoE is only 3 feet. That's the only downside in my opinion. It's a concentration spell, but it's a good use of it. So this is, I don't know if I want to put it in S. I don't think it's as good as Cloud of Daggers. I don't know, actually. It's kind of up there with it. It might just be slightly worse. I think I'll put it right here, right next to it. And then we have Pass Without Trace. So this is an AoE around you that gives you and nearby allies a +10 bonus to stealth checks. So it's a good effect. I actually used this a lot when I was playing Gloomstalker Assassin. It's a concentration, but I mean, you're not really using it in combat. Not too big of a deal. Lasts until a long rest. So it's good for sneaking around. Overall solid. Nothing too crazy. I think I would put it above actually, I don't. Invisibility is going to get you the surprise rounds probably more consistently than this will, but this is still a good effect. So I'll stick it right behind Invisibility. Next up, we have Phantasmal Force. This deals damage to a creature each turn. The type of damage changes to the last type of damage the creature suffered. So initially it deals 1d6 psychic damage, and it changes to the last type of damage inflicted on the target. Honestly, I don't really use this spell. It's a low amount of damage, and it's once per turn, and it's a concentration slot. By the time you get a lot of damage out of this, the fight will be almost over, usually. So to me, this is just a very, very mediocre spell. It's not really terrible, but certainly not something I would be using very often. Next is Prayer of Healing. And this heals all allies you can see within range by 2d8 plus your spellcasting modifier hit points. So it's good healing. It's only out of combat, however. So that is the one downside to it. When you use that 3rd level or higher, you get an additional 1d8 hit points for each spell slot level. So 30-foot radius, it's a good heal. And it's kind of hard to rate because it's out of combat only. It's good at what it does. And so I think somewhere around here is where I'd put it. After that, we have Protection from Poison. You touch a creature to neutralize all poisons affecting it. It gets protection from poisonous influences. So you get advantage on saving throws against being poisoned and resistance to poison damage. And poison's pretty common in this game. It's a long rest and it's concentration free, which is great. However, there's only a couple situations where enemies are dealing tons and tons of poison damage in this game. It's not like this is ever really a bad thing to cast per se. I think it's kind of in the same boat as Lesser Restoration, where it's very, very situational. I think I'll stick it behind Lesser Restoration. I actually put it in C tier, the top of C tier, because there's times when it'll be good, but there's a lot of times where it's just whatever, and you'll be better off using other things. Next up, we have Ray of Enfeeblement. So you weaken a foe, they deal half damage with weapon attacks using strength, which is super common. A lot of enemies use that. However, it's a concentration spell. There's a lot better uses of your concentration slot, in my opinion. It is an attack roll, and there's no upcasting involved. It can be really good against like bosses and stuff, but there's also no saving throw to resist, by the way. I didn't mention that, which is good. I think it's good, but it's not amazing or anything. So I think I'll stick it right in there. I don't really know where to put it, to be honest. After that, we have Scorching Ray. So you hurl 3 rays of fire. Each ray deals 2d6 fire damage. So when you upcast, it'll do an additional ray. And this is super, super good for on-hit effects. And just like a lot of spells that do that, it's fantastic because you can use damage riders, you can do all kinds of stuff. But yeah, super good. This is going to go in the S tier. And then after that, we have See Invisibility. So this lets you see invisible creatures, just like the name of the spell suggests. And you possibly reveal them to others. So you can reveal them to allies that aren't seeing invisibility, which is good. Lasts until a long rest. That's also great. And concentration free, which is also great. So it's overall good. You can get this for free with the whole eyeball thing, if you know what I'm talking about. So, I mean, I could bring it down because of that. I don't know if I necessarily want to. We'll stick it right in the middle of B tier, I think. Next to invisibility. Seems fitting. Next up, we have Shatter. So this does an AoE that does 3d8 thunder damage to all targets inside. Creatures made of inorganic materials such as stone have disadvantage on their saving throw. And there is a saving throw, Constitution save, where they'll take half damage if they pass that. The AoE is a little small, it's 10 feet, but I mean, you can get 3d8 damage on multiple targets, which is pretty good. Upcasting it will deal an extra 1d8 thunder damage for each spell slot above the second. So that's, that's okay upcasting. You can get a lot of value out of it, certainly. If you can hit, at least 2 enemies with that, that's pretty good value for a level 2 spell slot. Actually, don't know if I'm gonna put it that high in the B tier. I think I want to stick it right here. After that, we have Silence. This will create a soundproof sphere. Soundproof is important because you can actually do things with the soundproof aspect of it. A lot of people forget about that. But all within are silenced and immune to thunder damage. So there's things you can do with the immunity to thunder damage as well. And then silencing is going to make it so they can't cast spells that have a verbal component. So that's most spells. So you can shut down spellcasters pretty easily. Ritual spells, so casting out of combat doesn't cost you anything. It's a concentration slot, but it's pretty good at shutting down spellcasters. Overall, it's just a really good spell. Actually, I think down here it says something about it. Useful around sleeping creatures if one wishes to not wake them up. Yeah, that's kind of niche right there, but yeah, pretty good spell overall. Certainly something I would put in the A tier because there's a lot of spellcasters and it'll always be good against them. I think, let's stick it here. And then after that, one of my favorite spells in the game, Spike Growth. Shape a piece of ground into hard spikes. Creature walking the spikes takes 2d4 piercing damage for every 1.5 meters or 5 feet it moves. That triggers a lot. Yeah, spikes are difficult terrain, so they move at half the speed. It's a level 2 spell that does a ton of damage. You'll get so much value out of one cast of this. If you cast this in a hallway where enemies have to push you, even if you get one enemy with this, super good. It'll probably kill them, especially in the early game. And then it's a concentration slot, but this is a fantastic use of a concentration slot. Odds are you're going to hit at least 2 enemies with this. It has a pretty big AoE. Does it say where the AoE size is? I don't think it does. Oh, here we go. 20 feet. Yeah, it's pretty decent size. And it's 100 turns. So your concentration will break before that, likely. But yeah, this will last the whole fight if you can keep your concentration up. S tier spell. I think it's the best level 2 spell in the game. Next up, we have Spiritual Weapon. So you summon a floating spectral weapon of your choice that attacks enemies alongside you. The weapon is ethereal, immune to psychic and poison damage, and resistant to all damage types. Resistant to all other damage types. Yeah, ethereal basically just makes them incorporeal. They can't be shoved, thrown, or used as improvised melee weapon, which is okay. So this lasts 10 turns, which is basically an entire fight, which is good. Also a bonus action, super important because you can also follow it up with an attack. And the weapon will deal 1d8 plus 1 or 2d9, plus your spellcasting modifier, force damage. It's got a range of 60 feet, so you can cast this on archers or spellcasters to fight them while you're fighting melee enemies down by you, or whatever you want to do. If you're up above, you can cast it down into the middle of the fight. And this basically tanks hits for you and also can kill enemies. Although I find the chances to hit kind of low when I use this, but even still, it's taking hits, and it'll certainly take at least, I don't know, probably at least 2 hits. So you're getting good economy out of it. When you upcast, the weapon gains an additional 8 hit points and deals an additional 1d8 force damage for every 2 spell slots higher than the original. And then it has a bunch of different variants. There's a great axe, great sword, halberd, maul, spear, trident. They all have different effects or weapon attacks they can use, like great axe, slash, lacerate, and all of them can fly, so they can get around decently. Overall, really good spell because you're wasting enemies' turns and potentially killing enemies in the process as a bonus action. And then it's not the next couple turns, you're not using your economy, you're using the weapon's own economy. So it's super efficient. It's not like fight deciding, but certainly always a good option to cast. And then after that, we have Warding Bond. So you ward an ally, they gain resistance to all damage, so they'll take half damage from everything, and a +1 bonus to their armor class, so they're harder to hit, and saving throws. Each time the target takes damage, which is your ally, the spellcaster, which is you, will take same amount of damage. So you're basically both taking half damage. The enemy's still dealing the full damage. Kind of confusing, but basically the enemy still deals full damage. It's a split between you and your ally. So it's pretty good defensively. It's not something that's super amazing unless you cheese it, which I don't know if you can still do. I think you can. If you have somebody in camp cast this on you and they stay in camp, it's kind of cheesy, but it's pretty overpowered. Since it lasts until a long rest, you can cheese it pretty easily. I'd say if you're not doing the camp cheese strat, it's probably in the B tier for me. It's good, but it's not like super amazing in my opinion from what I've used it. If you're using the camp strat, it's A tier, maybe even S tier. It's pretty busted. So I think I'll put it, I've got a lot of stuff in the top end of this chart. I'll put it at the low end of A tier. And then finally, for our last one, we have web. You cover an area in a thick flammable webbing that can enweb creatures within. When enwebbed, they can't move. Attack rolls against the creature have advantage, and the creature's attack rolls and dexterity saving throws are rolled with disadvantage. So that's a good effect. And it has an AoE of 13 feet, which is pretty decent. The flammable part of it, I didn't really ever find that useful. I don't use the spell too often. I mean, I have used it, but I just don't think it's super amazing. I think it's probably a C tier spell, probably somewhere in there. Like, it's okay. It's not really anything to go crazy about because there's just a lot better options in fights. But yeah, that is it for our spell tier list. Let me see if I want to do any changes. There were a couple I was eyeballing. I think I wanted to put whole person into the S tier because yeah, you have to build around it a little bit. I mean, you technically don't, but if you do, it's just unstoppably overpowered. Like, it's ridiculous. That'll just end fights every single time you get in a combat encounter. Even on its own without building around it, it's still a good spell. So I think S tier is a better spot for it. And then lesser restoration, I was thinking of bringing it down just because it's so reactive. It's not like you're using it all that often. And I think, yeah, I think that's my final tier list for the second level spells. Drop a sub if you guys enjoyed this video and you want to see more content like this, and drop a like if you enjoyed the video. If you didn't enjoy it, I guess drop a dislike. I don't know. Do what you want to do. But I'll catch you guys in the next one.